Death Stranding 2 will be releasing for PlayStation 5 in just a few days, and I am, needless to say, very excited for the game. So much so that I have decided to put out my last minute predictions for the game, keeping in mind that I haven't watched all of the most recent trailers and gameplay previews and things like that. I watched the pre-order trailer in late March, and I was pretty much done after that. I want to get into some of my kind of more broader general predictions for the direction that the story will be going, and then we'll see when the game finally arrives just how accurate all this is. Probably not that much, but we'll do it anyway. Find out all the ways in which I was right and wrong, and maybe wrong. I'm probably wrong about some of this, but also a lot of this, like I said, is based off of stuff that we've already seen. So Hideo Kojima talked about how the major guiding theme for Death Stranding 2 on the beach was the idea of the stick versus the rope. The first game could be seen as very much centered on the importance of using the rope being the first tool that humans made to bring each other together, to bind people together and to save and preserve each other. Whereas what Kojima has talked about is that Death Stranding 2 will be about the importance of the stick, the idea that you need both, which is pretty clear when you see how combat and especially gunplay has been revamped and tweaked and improved upon in this game as well. But you're not completely ditching the rope for the stick. I think that that's going to be an important theme of this game, is that you do need both, and what happens when you stray too far in one direction over the other. And I think that's going to be another one of the major themes when it comes to Death Stranding 2. The tagline that's been in a couple of the different trailers of, should we have connected? And then in the most recent trailer, we should not have connected. What that is showing to me is that Kojima is very much writing Death Stranding 2 as a reaction or almost a deconstruction of that game, and whether or not the results and the after effects of what we accomplished in that game are going to be ultimately worth it. And I think that's going to be the big thematic overarching conflict that takes place in the second game. And I think there's going to be a couple of different ways in which that's shown. The first one is, I think we've kind of seen with some of the trailers showing the dudes in red that seem to have resurrected Higgs. So I think that in some way, your actions in Death Stranding 1 of connecting the UCA and bringing it back and connecting everybody to the chiral network, that will in some way have enabled these dark forces like Higgs and this mysterious faction, as well as the BT kaiju that we see in the game, as a consequence of the results of the first game. I think that's going to be a huge point for a lot of the tension and sort of the drama in the game between some of these different characters that are on either opposing sides of this. Ultimately, it will come to the conclusion that we need to obviously keep the good while fighting the bad, again, using both the rope and the stick. And so I think that's really what Kojima is going for here. Based on the trailers, it does seem like one of the themes will be that the UCA and its government have sort of almost abused the idea of the chiral network and of bridge babies and all these things that Sam used in that first game, which is what I think is going on with Neil's character when he says that he had to deliver brain dead pregnant women in from Mexico. I think that is going to be something that the UCA is involved in. Now, I don't want to focus too much on this, but I do think there is something interesting when you think about this game compared to the last game, trying to read or understand Hideo Kojima's commentary on abortion. Now, stay with me. A lot of people got the impression that the first Death Stranding was very much a sort of a pro-life message to that game because of the way that the unborn baby, BBs, were treated as people and more than just equipment, right? And how their life was considered valuable, even though they were technically not born, they were technically still fetuses, and they were technically not exactly classified as alive, right? But with the first game or with this game, I don't really know that Kojima's trying to make a statement on abortion. I really think that Kojima is more concerned with the commentary about what it means to be alive or dead, and kind of exploring that in different ways by having a character like Deadman, who is in that same weird limbo of being not quite dead but not quite alive, and the same thing with an unborn fetus, because it's not technically alive, right? It hasn't been born yet, but it's also not dead, so then what is it? And I think that that's more of what the theming that Kojima wants to explore, rather than just trying to make a political statement. And I could be wrong, and I don't really know what Kojima's thoughts are on abortion. I don't really care. It's possible that we could see Kojima either double down on the message of the first game or completely pivot and say, actually, for example, it's terrible to deliver brain dead pregnant women and how that's total an abuse or something like that as an argument for abortion. I don't know. And like I said, I don't really care. I could see it going either way. Kojima's commentary about what it means to be alive and dead is more what he's focused on, as opposed to just the abortion debate. But, we'll see how it goes. And, like I said, I don't really care one way or the other, but I'm sure people will have fun debating that. Now this gets into, when it comes to Bridge Babies and when it comes to Lou specifically from the first game, there's some weird stuff going on with Lou. Seems to have disappeared or gone missing within some part of this game. At the same time, we have a new character being introduced, which is Tomorrow. Honestly, I would not be surprised if Tomorrow turns out to actually be Lou from the future. I don't know exactly how that would work. My guess is some sort of time travel shenanigans through the beach or something, and my thought is that maybe she could possess sort of a similar destructive apocalyptic power to Amelie. It seems like Higgs is trying to convince her to join him to be able to bring about the extinction or whatever, and I think that that could be an interesting struggle because she would have only seen the bad that would have come from Sam's actions in the first game and not necessarily the good or the hope that it would have brought. Based on the trailers and looks at her character we have had, it seems like she has a mysterious origin and that she's set up as somebody who possesses a lot of power, is very capable in a sort of supernatural way. So it could go either way, but I could see Tomorrow being Lou and that being the big twist of the game. Just remember where you heard it first. Now, one of the other aspects of this sort of ideological struggle between the rope and the stick and the good that Sam did in the first game versus the bad and what that reaction will be. My guess is that while Sam, I think, is, as the player character, I think Sam is the embodiment of the rope, whereas Neil, the new character being introduced, is the embodiment of the stick. Based on what we've seen, my guess is that Neil will have only seen the bad side of the UCA's actions and decides to sever all ties and stop working for them and instead fight against them, again using the stick, and he will likely fight Sam at some point. That'd be my guess. And I think he seems like a really interesting character, and with his contrast towards Sam and his conflict, and I think they could have a pretty interesting dynamic there. Now, we pretty much know that this already isn't going to happen. Based on the trailers and the impressions of the game that we already have, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're going to be playing as Sam for the majority of the game again, same as the first one. I don't think Kojima will pull the Raiden trick again, although I would not be surprised if there is like one level where we play as Neil for a couple segments, or if we play as Tomorrow for one or two segments. Again, like I said, it's more likely that we'll just be playing as Sam the whole time, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kojima wants to have a big moment where we play as a different character, have that be a very shocking moment for the player. It's interesting because people are looking at Neil as a very major Solid Snake parallel, I mean, with his character design and everything, which I think is really cool. So aside from Neil and the design of the Magellan just being the head of Metal Gear Rex, I don't really think there will be any major parallels to Metal Gear Solid, other than maybe you could kind of see Sam as being sort of a big boss parallel by going rogue from his own government after working for them in the previous game. It's kind of a stretch, but that's really all I've got. Now, obviously, this has covered more of the sort of broad and more of the bigger overarching things that will be going on in the story. But there was an interesting comment, I believe was a statement from Kojima. He said a Death Stranding 3 is possible after Death Stranding 2, and that it would be, I'm paraphrasing here, but it would be based on a MacGuffin from DS2, but not from Kojima. Interesting. I guess I'll be curious to, when we play the game, I'll be curious to see what that MacGuffin is, if it's something that's like really obvious and kind of sets up for a sequel, or if it's going to be something that you could pull on a thread, but it could kind of stand alone and be an ending to this series. So, I mean, based on that, I think it's possible that we get a Death Stranding 3, but in my opinion, my predictions for Death Stranding 3 would be that it would likely be a lower stakes and sort of smaller scale game if it does end up happening, because Kojima won't be involved, and it'll probably just be more of something to kind of wrap up with different characters and kind of spend more time in that world, as opposed to being this next huge chapter that changes everything, right? Now, that being said, I think a lot of the deciding factor on whether or not we even get a Death Stranding 3 will be how well the second game does, and I hope it does well. It seems like people are more excited to it, there's more hype around it, and it was glad to see more people come around, because when I first played it, you know, it was a lot more divided, the kind of consensus on it, and the game still has flaws, but it was interesting to see the narrative kind of shift over the course of the last few years in between the first and second games, where it started as people kind of dismissing it and not really caring about it, to the point where so many people came around by it. And I think part of that was the release on other platforms and everything, but it was cool to see that people came around to it, and now everybody's really looking forward to Death Stranding 2. So that would be, I wouldn't be surprised if the game does a lot better than the first one, and I think people will come around to it. I think there will be a lot of people that you could get to be really excited for a Death Stranding 3 whenever that ends up happening. So anyway, let me know what your predictions for Death Stranding 2 on the beach are in the comments, or do a video response, or whatever you want to do. I am, like I said, very excited to play the game, and I'll probably just be in a hole for about 3 months playing that, so nobody bother me till then. What did I just tell you?